Welcome to the Speckle Park podcast, where we look behind the scenes at the incredible breed designed to maximise profit, minimise inputs, and build a high-performance commercial beef herd. This episode is sponsored by JAD Speckle Park's 7th annual Bull and Female Sale, hosted in Yeovil, New South Wales on Friday, 4th of April 2025. To get instant access to the catalogue and sale offering information, simply visit jadspecklepark.com.au. Welcome to the very first episode of the Why Speckle Park podcast. Today, we're going to start with a soft approach for me. I'm going to interview Justin, the other half of JAD Speckle Park. Now, Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Amy. It's good to be here.
Now, I know you, but for those who are joining us today, how would you introduce yourself in a sentence or two?
Well, I'm Justin Dickens. I am married to my beautiful wife, Amy, and we have two lovely boys, Jack and Mitchell, and we farm here in Central West New South Wales at a little town called Yeovil, where we began our farming business over a decade ago now.
Yeah, that's right. Back in March 2012, if I remember correctly. Feels like yesterday.
Yeah, it does. And we were brought to the Yeovil district through a job which I held down for a total of 7 years. And partway through that, we took the leap of faith and bought our first property. And here we are today now as a solo business, I suppose, and living the dream.
Yep, that's the way. If we go back a few steps, can you provide listeners with an overview of your career to date?
Well, I've never really ever entertained the thought of doing anything other than a life in agriculture. I grew up on a farm. My father managed for my entire life as a child. He managed for the Martin family at Coolah. My mother came off country at Wanaaring. I guess I grew up working with Dad on school holidays and after school, and a lot of school holidays I went back to Mum's family country at Wanaaring, and I just had a really strong interest in particularly livestock, but all facets of farming, I suppose, from a very young age, and I've never really considered doing anything else. So, yeah, it's been part of me from day one, really.
So what is your earliest agricultural memory? And did anything from your childhood inspire you to take the career path you chose?
Oh, I think I grew up, Dad was at work and we just followed along. And then, we were lucky enough to be given an opportunity, I suppose, to work, for a bit of part-time money for Dad's employer at the time. And that was, we could have been tagging starter Hereford calves or fixing a flood fence on the creek or putting out some feed to some cattle or whatever. So it was just part of day-to-day life. I always enjoyed it. It was never a chore. It was fun, and it just evolved into a career at the end of the day.
I guess if we cast your mind back to that childhood, you actually had quite a significant interest in poultry and breeding poultry, correct?
Definitely. As a child, I had incubators and was very mad at my chooks, and then went into dogs in my teenage years and bred and trialled working dogs, and then also stock horses. So I've always had a strong interest in breeding animals, and even in my job one of my jobs in my sort of early part was at Bingra, and that involved quite a bit in stud Angus breeding as well. So I've always enjoyed the breeding aspect of livestock systems, and it's a real strong passion. Yeah,
and it was while you were at Bingra that we met. I was a journalist for The Land, and you won the Australian Cattle Dog Trialling Championships, and I had the luck of interviewing you, and the rest is history, as they say.
That's right. Yeah, no, it's funny how things turn out. But no, it's opened many doors for me, agriculture, and continues to do so. And it's a wonderful industry to be part of. It's evolving all the time with innovation, and it's an absolutely terrific place to raise a family. And it's always different. Every single day is different. Every season is different. Every market change all the time. We've got to be adaptable, and that's what I love about it. It's not a steady state. We've got to continually improve all the time to be relevant, and that's what I love about it.
So what has been your favourite job you've held to date, and why?
I've had some great jobs. I think probably the one that I held with Kieran Ag was the most challenging for me, in that it really pushed me to be better and understand numbers more, I guess, and the economics of agriculture. I've always been a very hands-on person and quite capable with my hands and with stock and the day-to-day operations, but that really pushed me deep into into understanding the financial literacy of agriculture. And we wouldn't be here today, I don't think, in our farming business without that mentoring and that experience that I had from that job.
So we came down here in January 2008 when you took up that role as production manager for Nigel and Kate Kieran of Kieran Agriculture, and now we're neighbours.
That's right. It's a great story. I mean, you don't often see it, I guess, today with startup, and obviously we've been able to maintain a strong relationship in our transition out into a business of our own, and still get on very well and are great neighbours, and it's a good story. So, but that's what my whole life's been about in agriculture, is relationships with people, and I've I've met some tremendous people right through my career that have helped me hone my skills and, develop into where we are today.
So what has been a highlight of your career to date, and perhaps what's been one of the biggest challenges you've faced in business?
The main highlight would have to be the day we bought our first farm. It was extremely daunting, I guess. It was probably looking back on it, was a long shot for any bank to probably bank us. But again, it was relationships and contacts that helped that happen, and that was a real achievement to buy our first property, Coolah, which was 1,500 acres, and since then we've gone on to grow. But I think that, and probably another highlight would be our 2022 bull sale. That was a day that I'll never ever forget. To gross 1.8 million in, I think, our third or fourth year, I think it was, in seed stock. That was a tremendous achievement and a day that I'll remember fondly. But as far as challenges, I guess one that rings to mind, and in the very early part of our business venture, I was working off farm all week and managing our 1,500 acres on weekends, and we inherited a portion of cropping country, and the decision was made to sell it all down to pasture in the first year, and it was a significant expense, about $50,000 from memory. And I remember a few days after planting that pasture, we had a torrential downpour of about 70 mils in less than an hour, and it basically buried every seed, and the inputs were lost, and we had to strike up the courage to go again. And I think that was a great lesson in the early years, that that's what farming's all about. You can have some knocks, but you just got to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and get on with it. But we went on and planted it again and succeeded, but that's what can happen. You just don't know.
Just wrapping your head around the complexity of going again. It's easy to say, but in the moment, like you said, it's incredibly daunting, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. And obviously, you're in your first year and you're trying to stick to a budget, and but then you get something left to field like that happens, you have to play the hand and you just got to roll on. But we've had just as equally, we've had some wonderful, upsides in markets and, tremendous sales and that over the years that have far exceeded expectation, which balances everything out, I think.
So we started JAD Speckle Park in 2016. We purchased 200 embryos from Canada and away we went, somewhat naively, but having bred Speckle Park commercially since 2012, so it wasn't really that naive. We had experience with them commercially, hadn't we? Can you explain why we started the stud and what our breeding objectives are?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm a person that's got I guess I'm hands-on, and I follow my gut, and I think I'm quite observant in the field. And, our business was designed around a trading model, and that's all we did for those early years was trade sheep and cattle. And along that journey, I remember Dad having a little whisper in your ear and saying, you should have a look at these cattle. I think they might have some merit. It took me off down to Oberon, and we bought a little white bull and came home, and we joined him to a few cows and observed those progeny grow and traded a lot of speckled cattle through the system. And from there, I just was continually amazed at the doability of the cattle, first and foremost. I just couldn't get over how they could live on so little resources and always look well, and they were fertile and they were high-yielding cattle. And so I think that sort of built up a rapport that I kept looking at these cattle and saying they really, really fit our environment better than anything else at the time. And that was what, initially struck my eye, was that they were very functional cattle. But then as we delved further into the, research and around meat quality and the high-yielding aspect of the cattle, I just felt that, they just had too many things in their favour in that they continually just kept coming to the fore. So, we had a tremendous commercial heifer sale at the time with Speckle Park heifers and far exceeded our budget or our sale prediction, and we actually invested that money into embryos, and that was the start of it. But, yeah, I think probably getting back to what you said about our stud objectives, I think that it's largely around the fact that these cattle tick more boxes, I think, than any other breed that I've come across, in what a breed needs to tick into the future. And that's what I think's really probably not spoken about in industry enough, is that we need our animals to fit the landscape and fit the resources that we have at our disposal. The minute we start to try to design animals for either someone else's desire or, whether that be what a feedlot wants or a processor wants, and we start to design those cows that, in a manner that removes them from what naturally fits the landscape, I think we have negative consequences that come as a result. And that's what concerns me about the direction of a large proportion of our industry now, is that it's becoming far more dependent on resources to prop up these systems to deliver this product, and that comes at a cost. And I have some concerns around that in general, and I think that these cattle, they naturally do the heavy lifting for you. They're resilient, they're excellent at feed conversion, they yield extremely well, they have a softness of carcass that's quite unique in high-yielding animals, and that, that's the nuts and bolts. They're very fertile, they're very good temperamented, and they last. The cows stand up and last the test of time. They don't fall apart structurally. They've got great feet legs, very strong through the stifle. And the bulls, we just get next to no comebacks on the bulls that we sell, and that's a real testament to the breed's longevity, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's 12 and a half years now since we bought that first white bull, and our early experiences were really around the resilience of the cow, and here we are at the completion of summer 24-25 having the same conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we've, since we started off, I mean, we went through those early years of investing into the seed stock through the drought, and we were just continually impressed by how the cattle handled adversity. And, it's not until you actually have to put feed in front of an animal that you realise what they can and can't live off. And, it's all right to look at them in the paddock, and we forget what the stocking rate we used to run 10 years ago to what we run now, or the inputs that we put in now that we didn't put in 10 years ago, or, how many breakdowns we had in cows and bulls 10 years ago to how we have now. And I think we need to think about those things because they do influence profitability. And I think we've certainly observed with these cattle is that they need less inputs, and their output's very good, and it's of high quality. And that's, I think, what the nuts and bolts of why we've gone down the path in Speckle Park.
Yeah, people certainly need to be looking at those little less obvious costs in a breeding enterprise, such as the cost per calf of a bull breakdown, or multiple bull breakdowns, or cows breaking down and cows not rebreeding.
Yeah, well, I have a real strong opinion on that. I mean, it's okay to, well, you might think it's okay to have a bull breakdown, and, you go back to the stud and say, well, this has happened, he's broke down, he's done his stifle, as a 3-year-old, and you get a credit when you go back and buy another bull. But my concern is what happens with all those females that bull's bred before he's broken down, and those cows live in your herd now and live his legacy out, I suppose, which will likely end in a similar fashion to him. So I have concerns around that. I think that's something that we need to really, those hidden costs are certainly there, and, there's a lot more to beef profitability than just price per kilo. There's no doubt about that.
So if you were to summarise, how would you answer our signature podcast question of why Speckle Park?
Well, I think I did it earlier in a form. I think that they are the breed that tick more boxes of what's going to be required of a breed into the future. And I think with our cost of production in the beef industry in Australia, it's undeniable that we need high quality product. I think that, we can't just produce commoditised beef in the masses because our cost structure is quite elevated compared to the rest of the world. So we have to produce elite product. Speckle Park can do that. They have to yield well. They definitely do that. The cows have to last the test of time, as do the bulls, and we know that they have exceptional longevity. They have to be mild temperamented. They tick that box. They're fertile. We continually measure that. They're early maturing, and I see no negative from an early maturing animal. And I think that's opens another segue, I guess, as to it's a concern of mine that we've got an industry that seems to be hell-bent on this desire to feed meat quality into cattle with longer and longer feed regimes. And I see that as an industry trend, and it concerns me that when we go into the next big dry spell is how we're going to get all of these cattle out of paddocks and into feed bunks when, we've got enormous amount of our feedlot space now taken up with, long feed regimes of, north of 200-300 days length of feed. And I think that this breed can produce exceptional meat quality at, where we traditionally used to feed cattle at 70, 80, 100 days. These cattle can deliver exceptional meat quality at a shorter feed program. So that's, where I think they fit. I think that when you combine all of those things, you've got meat quality, you've got high yield, you've got fertility, longevity, temperament. They tick all the boxes, I think, and they do it in a terminal sense. And if the cows are great functional cows, if you want to run a maternal herd of the cattle as well.
It does seem incongruous that we've got an industry that's lengthening feed programs while we've got a consumer demanding a reduced carbon footprint and environmental profile.
Yeah, and look, I'm far from I'm certainly very aware of the conversations and the spotlight on industry. I'm not sure where that's going to end, but I certainly don't see any negative of trying to push any animal through the production system. The quicker the better is the way I consider it. I mean, we look at what they've done with chicken and pork and even lamb. We can turn those animals off at significantly less days on the planet than what the beef industry traditionally did. And it seems to me that, as an industry, we're actually lengthening that, not shortening it. And I have concerns around that. I think the industry needs to have a really good look at what's going on there and look for avenues as to how we can get exceptional meat quality with less inputs and less time. Essentially, time's the killer.
So if we're to look at JAD Speckle Park itself, what would you say has been the highlight of JAD Speckle Park's journey so far?
I think just the development of the cattle. I think that, I'm a very critical person of our own herd as much as anyone else's, but I could see when we started that the cattle had tremendous tremendous merit, but we had to make them more relevant for the Australian environment and conditions. And I think that's probably been my greatest thrill, is to see how quickly we've been able to transition these cattle from what we originally started with to get them to where they're consistently more and more relevant every year. And I think that's probably, I was critical in the early days that, the cattle probably needed a little bit more performance than where we started. I think that we certainly had to work on things like temperament and scrotal and, just functionality of the cattle, but we've improved the shoulder set on the cattle and lengthened the neck and just got the calving ease better to a point now where I'm really quite content with the make and shape of the cows. They really suit our environment, and it's happened, inside a decade. So that, I'm really excited about that. And I think we've really only just in the last few years started to really hone in on the meat quality aspects of the breed, and, they're inherently naturally very high. But if, with some concentration, I can see that we can make enormous gains in that aspect as well, I think, without too many detrimental effects on other traits. So the cattle are naturally quite high in intramuscular fat, which we know influences meat quality. It's undeniable that IMF does influence eating quality, but these cattle, can maintain tremendous lean meat yield and carcass, in those high IMF cattle. It's very hard for me to walk through a herd of Speckle Park, bulls or heifers and be able to pick out the high IMF cattle phenotypically, where certainly when I compare them to our Angus cattle, the Angus, certainly the more IMF we put in them, it seems to be, the more up and down they are and less muscle expression they have. So, I think these cattle have that really good natural balance of carcass merit, and that's a really positive, I think.
You mentioned the Angus breed there. There's been a push in southern states for greater adoption of Angus cattle, and livestock agents have played a large role in this. It is interesting to note that we breed both Speckle Park and Angus cattle under the JAD prefix. Why are we breeding Angus now, and what differences have you observed between the two breeds?
Well, I mean, it's, we get asked all the time, how would I compare a Speckle Park to an Angus? And I think, at the end of the day, Angus is undeniably the powerhouse of British bred cattle in southern Australia, particularly, and it's pushing heavily into the north. To be a true believer, I think you have to benchmark things, and that was the main motivation while we started the Angus stud off, was to benchmark the Speckles against the most adopted and accepted breed in southern Australia, and that was the initial motivation. And from those experiences, it's quite evident the variations that we see. I think the Angus cattle, they've really bred short gestation, calving ease and high growth into the cattle. There's no doubt that they are born early, light and grow well. But I think, as a general rule, I think that over time, I think we're taking the eye off the ball. I think, in Angus, in structural integrity and getting cattle to last. That's my experience, and it's not just within our own herd. It's what I talk to people out in the industry all the time, and vets and other producers, and there's certainly a spotlight on the functionality of Angus cattle in general, and I think it needs to be looked at heavily, for sure.
So for those in Speckle Park and likely listening to this, what should Speckle Park breeders be doing more of or differently to share the breed's story?
I think we continually need to focus on improvement, make the cattle more relevant to our conditions here in Australia. We've done quite a large amount of research and development and trial work, and I think that's yielded positive results, which we, sing from the rooftops. And I think it is just an awareness thing. It's twofold. We've got to continue to improve the cattle to the point where people just can't, they can't ignore them any longer. And I think we have to continue to measure and try to extract every little positive out of what we find and market it. Rome wasn't built in a day, and when you look at how long the breed's been here in Australasia, it's still a very new breed, really. And I've said it before, I think that we, for our conditions now, the best Speckle Park cattle in the world are here in Australasia for our conditions, and that's because, there's been some breeders that have really honed in and tried to adapt them and make them more suitable for the landscape that we raise them in.
Fantastic. It seems among certain stud breeders, there's a perception that you are either a phenotype breeder or a data breeder. What role does data and objective measurement play in your decision-making processes at JAD? And how does that or doesn't that play in with phenotypic assessments, etc.?
Yeah, I think you can't have one and not have the other. I think you've got to have a balance there, and I think you can't just breed cattle on paper, and nor can you just ignore data and just breed animals on phenotype. I think you have to have a balance there, and certainly, like I said before, if you walk through a pen of our bulls and thought you could phenotypically judge the high IMF cattle in our herd, it's impossible to do that. So I think you need to look at figures, and certainly we know where we have to improve our herd in general, I guess, to move them them forward from a data perspective. So we look at that. But phenotype is extremely important. And I think that, the shape of the animal and, the structural integrity, the feet, the legs, the angles, that stuff's enormously important to form and function and longevity. I think if you want cattle to last and work for you, they have to be able to physically do it. It is an important trait, but equally as important is that we continually try to produce a consistent eating experience for the consumer. And the only way we can do that is to lift over time, the meat quality of our cattle. And that can only really be done with measurement and data.
So what knowledge and experiences from your farm management positions have you brought forward to assist you as a cattle stud owner?
I think just, every day getting up and managing commercial operations, which I did for, all my working life, really. You're out there every day dealing with mobs of cows and, whether you're sitting on a horse or on a bike in behind cattle or in yard sorting cattle up. And, if your eyes are open, you learn enormous about what works and what doesn't work. From doing that over the years and having a keen eye in genetics and looking at what's possible in relation to, cows and mature cow weight and, looking at the calves that come off them at weaning and then what those calves do and how they grow out and flow through the supply chain. I think it's, years and years of that has sort of crafted my mind into what I think is where the optimum sits. And that's, I'm fortunate to have had that background, and that sort of heavily influences the design of the cow that we're trying to breed now.
So what has been the most influential Speckle Park sire used to date at JAD and why?
We've got some tremendous size here now that will take our herd forward, but I'd have to say that it's probably more than one, but the Mungahina influence on our herd has been tremendous. I mean, Mark McKenzie at Mungahina, I think, has done an enormous amount for the Speckle Park breed. We've bought bulls there in Promise and Nico, and we've used Kidman Cove and Northern Star. Those sires have a heavy, heavy influence on our herd, and they've allowed us to work on multiple traits in unison. So we've been able to, sort out structural issues, temperament issues, fertility issues, all at the same time as we've been trying to improve meat quality and data in the cattle. So, hats off to Mark and the work that he's done over the years. And I'm very proud to call him a great friend. I think he and his family are terrific cattle people. And, without doubt, those genetics have really bolstered our herd. And now it comes down to us being able to identify the bulls that we've got coming through now, like Marshall and, Unstoppable, the young bull that's coming through, that I think they'll go on and have a huge influence on our herd. And so, no, that's probably it in a nutshell, really.
But if you were to pinpoint one sire that's been most influential, who would you say?
I'd probably say Promise. I'm really quite excited about his daughters. They're functional cows. They work hard. They're fertile. They're very structurally correct. He's bred our Marshall bull, who, I think is the most complete bull that we've certainly put on the ground. And I'm really happy with his progeny and how they're developing. So I'd say Promise, yeah.
So where do you see the beef industry in 10 years' time, and what should we do now as an industry to either propel us towards that end point or change course?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm a little bit nervous in answering it because I actually don't know. I have an opinion on where I think it might go, but yeah, I don't know. I think undeniably our costs are high, and I don't see how as producers, we can have a strong influence on our cost structures. But I think it's undeniable that the quality of the product's got to be good simply because of the cost of it. So we have to continually work on a more consistent product to the consumer. That's absolutely critical, because when you look at chicken and pork, they are such consistent products nowadays, and they're our major competitors. So, to get a bad bit of steak when you've spent $60 and $70 and $80 on it's just not on. So I think quality is going to be at the forefront of all decision making. I can't see how this push towards purebred systems is a good thing for the beef industry. It certainly seems to be topical at the moment that a lot of meat's branded on breed, and I really struggle with that from a quality point of view, because and an economics point of view for the industry, because at the end of the day, hybrid vigour is one of the greatest freebies Mother Nature can ever give us. And, chicken and pork and even lamb, they're all hybrid systems, yet we seem to be having a greater and greater proportion of, the Australian beef industry being designed around purebred systems. So I can't see that holding true long term. I think that we need to explore crossbreeding more, but at the same time, we need to be able to produce consistently high quality product. And, I know there'd be people that would argue that's not easy to do when you bring more genes together and try to explode that performance side of it. But at the end of the day, it is a costly protein to produce, and we've got to be able to do better at that. I think we've got to be able to do it quicker with less inputs, and we have to be able to make it consistently high quality. And I think that's where the great need for industry R&D and development is in and around that meat quality. And I think it encompasses far more than just intramuscular fat. I think that there's a lot more to meat quality, which that was the impetus for us to do the research at the University of Newcastle, was to understand what makes this meat so palatable. And it's things like omega-3 and fat melting point that have a huge influence over eating quality. And I think that's where the industry needs to hone in on, is what else influences meat quality and tenderness and, flavour and juiciness of the meat. There's more to it than just simply chasing intramuscular fat off a cliff.
What's the biggest challenge you're facing in your career right now, and how are you tackling it?
I think the biggest challenge that we face as a business is certainly market variability. And I think that with the debt loading that most agricultural businesses carry today, it's just not palatable to have rises and collapses of commodities like we see. So I think it's risk management is a big one, price assurance. It's incredibly important. And I know seed stock's very difficult to hedge, I guess, in a seed stock point of view, but certainly in trading and, in commercial beef production, I think that's what's vastly lacking in the industry is greater price assurance. We've just got to be able to land close to our budgets more often than have these highs and lows, and being able to service the commitments of a business year in, year out. We just need to have a better grip on where our price received is going to land, and then manage our cost of production around that, and just get a more consistent outcome than this boom and bust that agriculture is so renowned for.
Well, that's right. And it was late 2023 when we had that bust that really mentally people still aren't over, are they, in the beef industry?
No, and that one to me will never ever make sense from the point of view that there was a relatively good season in the bottom half of New South Wales and into Victoria through that period, and there was just no confidence from people down there to support, the drying northern climate. And, we saw a massive collapse in both sheep and lamb over that period. And, I think it was largely caused by weather predictions that we were going into El Nino and
that didn't eventuate.
That it just didn't eventuate, yes. And the old saying, producers drive the market up and then they drive it down, and it is very true. But that one just didn't make sense for me, and it still doesn't from a resources point of view. There was no need for it to roll out the way that it did, but it had enormous consequences financially for a huge portion of the industry, and I still don't think it's recovered to this day. I think that confidence has been battered around. We saw huge shifts on balance sheets as a result of it, and it's not good for anyone in the industry, those sort of events. What the solution to it is, I'm not sure, but I think price assurance and certainly more products in the market around risk management, like whether they be swaps or physical forward contracts, I think they're definitely needed to prevent those circumstances from happening again.
Well, it's a terrible lost opportunity when in the nearly 2 years since that collapse in late 2023, we've had producers with plenty of grass but lacking the confidence to go out and do a trade on that grass. That's a massive loss in productivity and potential, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely it is. And I think people have just lost whether they've lost the capacity to be able to borrow or just lost the desire to actually do it. And I think when you get to that point, it's, that's really unfortunate for the broader industry. So that's all. I don't have the answers to that. But I am aware of, even in our situation here, it's had enormous consequences. And I think that as an industry, we need to work towards a better outcome, I think, in that area.
If we refocus back on Speckle Park, you often refer to the need for animals to be fit for environment. What do you mean by this?
Well, that to me simply means that cow, I guess, which is the powerhouse of a breeding enterprise, does she fit your landscape suitably? And by that is, how many inputs do you need to put into that genetic package in a female in a 12-month cycle to produce, essentially a profit out the other end? And I think that we've been, encouraged by the supply chain and we get told as producers that we've got to either, have our cattle grow quicker, or, we've got to have more IMF in our cattle, or, we need, they've got to be shorter gestation or lower birth weight, or all these things that influence our decisions. But to me, the minute you start to design an animal that doesn't naturally fit the landscape, it comes at a cost, and those costs have got to be absorbed, at the end of the day before we get any profit out the other end. And I think that we do live in the driest continent on earth, and, we know here we're in a pretty safe environment here at Yeovil, but our cow herd, continually faces adversity, not every year, but every 2 or 3 years we get a dry pinch, and if those cows have got their hand out in those periods, well, it influences profit. So I think with that, we want them to be functional in the landscape. And you could argue that, if you lived in a place like the Gippsland, for instance, we can probably justify having, 700-800 kilo cows in that environment where the rainfall's more consistent and the soils are richer. But a big portion of Australia's cattle breeding country is in marginal rainfall environments. And I think that, you need to have a really strong look at what is that ultimate cow that fits your landscape, and because that will be the one that will be the most likely to generate a profit for you at the end of the day. So that's what it's about. It's, obviously all of that, we want them to last as well, because if cows are not living to the hardest thing I say is it's easy to get that heifering calf at 14 to 15 months old and drop that calf as a 2-year-old, but if she comes in open at her second preg test, that's an enormous cost to the system. Just like it is if she stifles herself as a 4-year-old. You've gone through all that initial cost to get her through to generate a calf or maybe two, and then she falls out of the system. That's an enormous cost. So we've got to have animals that work for you, I think, and that last the test of time, and rebreed every year and raise a great calf. And when they're not lactating and not raising a calf, they're easy to look after and prop themselves up as best they can.
So what observations have you made with respect to mature cow weight and rebreed rates? And then I guess with that knowledge, what would you say the ideal mature cow weight range is for your environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that, what I've observed here with both our Speckle and our Angus is that there is definitely a tipping point. The later maturing we make the cattle and the bigger the mature cow weight, the more likely that they're going to stumble when it comes to fertility at some point. So my ideal cow weight for where we live here commercially, I think, is a 580 to 640 kilo cow. Either side of 600 kilos, I think that's as big as she needs to be able to produce progeny that go on and meet the supply chain requirements. I think that, it's overstated that we need these big, powerful cows to produce the product out the other end. I think that the industry needs to have a closer look at that, and getting back to what I said about the use of hybrid vigour. If we have a fertile, functional cow herd at 600 kilos, for instance, and a terminal bull going over the top that gives an explosion of growth and allows those animals to accelerate to market specs quicker, that's got to be a better outcome long term. So, yeah, I think that your landscape will dictate what your optimum mature cow weight is. There are areas where it'll be bigger than that, and there'll be areas where it's smaller than that, but particularly where I managed for 8 years in the Bingra district. A 600 kilo cow up there is too big. It's just too big. That environment can't sustain high fertility rates with cows of that sort of scope and scale in a native, poor quality soil type, low fertility type country. So it's largely influenced on where you are, and the inputs you put into your farm, I think, will influence what the optimum is. But at the end of the day, a huge amount of their yearly intake of fodder is for maintenance and maintenance only, and that is influenced by a percentage of body weight. So I think as producers, we probably forget about if our cows have got bigger by 60, 80, 100 kilos over time, how many did I used to run on the same amount of country, and how much fertiliser did I used to put out to what I'm putting out now to run the same number of cows, or what was the average breakdown rate of my cows when they were 100 kilos lighter. All those things, I think as producers we probably don't think enough about it and about what's actually changed over time. But certainly the industry has developed cattle that do perform at higher rates, and our feedlot sector's telling us that we want to feed these cattle onto bigger and bigger and heavier animals, and we want big heavy carcasses on the rail. I'm of the opinion that, that's still got to be profitable for the breeder back home. If those cows, to design those animals that tick all the boxes for the supply chain, are not profitable to run in the Australian landscape, well, then we've got a real problem. And I think that's a discussion that needs to be had at industry quite urgently, to be honest, because I can see that if we continue down the road we're headed, we're going to have a mismatch in the very, very near future.
Couldn't agree more. As we get towards concluding our podcast episode, what's the most important lesson you've learnt in your career so far?
I think the most important lesson I'd say is the calculator doesn't lie. I've been as guilty as anyone of telling the story in my head and trying to justify why I should or shouldn't make a decision. But I think at the end of the day, you come back to the office, sit down, take the emotion out of it, run the numbers. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Don't try to come to the conclusion without doing the sums. I think that's probably a big lesson that we've learned over the time, is that the importance of running the numbers, because what you think might be the outcome to actually what is the outcome are quite often two different things.
Who has been your most important professional mentor?
Oh, look, there's been many. Obviously, my time at Kieran with Nigel Kieran, that influenced, I guess, the way we conduct ourselves in business. But it's also been a number of coaches over the years. we've had a business coach on and off since inception, and I think those people, Sean Martin, Peter Deebers, they've had a real influence on I guess, our discipline and the way we conduct business. I think, we've got some great service providers in our agents, B&L. Nick Fogarty's a great mate and a great mentor to me from a supply chain point of view. Ross Yellen, agronomy. Yeah, the list is endless. At the end of the day, without all of the people that we do business with, and their support, we wouldn't be where we are today. So it's probably, it definitely is more than just one, and I'm hugely appreciative of all the people that support us on our journey each and every day in business, including our bank.
What's one piece of advice you would give someone either starting a cattle stud or a commercial producer starting a cattle enterprise in their business?
To me, it's got to be the one we just spent a lot of time talking about. Shape your and design your animal for your environment. The old saying, there's no point going to Wanaaring to grow wheat as it is, trying to do organic beef production in a 1,000 mil rainfall environment. They're very hard to pull off just simply because you're fighting Mother Nature. So I think, you need to design the animal that fits your environment. That's, to me, if you do that, you got some chance of getting it right. The minute you try to have a mismatch there, at significant levels, your cost structure is going to beat you and your output is going to be low because of animals just not thriving. So, I think that's probably it.
Excellent. Last question. What is your favourite quote and why?
I think it's take a look at the 5 people you spend most amount of time with and you've just had a look into your future. I think that it might sound arrogant, but the people you hang around with certainly do influence the way you conduct yourself, whether you like it or not. We are social animals or beings, I suppose. And I think that if you have negative people in your clan, it will influence your approach to life. So I think surround yourself with people who you admire and leverage off them and it'll naturally flow through to the person that you are. So, I've learnt that over the years and, I think over time I've become a much more positive person than I was earlier on in business life and even in work life. I think that experience in working for Nigel up there at Kieran Ag, he's the eternal optimist, and it was hard yakka for me because, you'd be dooming and glooming and you get a rock in the back of the head, but that's how he rolls and I think it's had a more positive impact on me over time and continues to do so. So I think that, there's really nothing good comes out of negativity and surround yourself with positive, like-minded people and they'll help you on your endeavours in life.
Very good. Well, thanks very much, Justin. Got the monkey off my back, first one under our belts, and it's been really good having a chat. So thank you very much.
No, it's great. It's always difficult to be interviewed by your wife. I hopefully it comes across okay, and I really applaud you for the initiative, and I hope that you can get this thing to to be something on a regular basis and keep telling the great story about Speckle Park, because to me it's the greatest breakthrough in breed for the Australian beef industry for a very, very, very long time. And I'm more passionate about the breed now than I was when we first started to play around with them over a decade ago, and I really think that the gains that we've made over this short period of time have been significant. I think we can continue to improve them, but like I said, these cattle tick more boxes than anything else that I've come across for the needs of the future, and that's what really motivates me. I'm really committed to their further development. I'm really excited about that. So thanks very much and good luck with the podcast in the future, Amy, and I'll be listening to every episode. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.